Senator Sanders, welcome back. So where are we at on the Build Back Better bill? And also I want to get into the defense spending bill.
Good. Well, a lot is happening. As you know, recently the House passed what the Senate passed several months ago, and that is the infrastructure bill. And Tom, as I'm sure you are more than aware, for decades now, you've had Republican presidents and Democratic presidents talking about our crumbling infrastructure and the need to rebuild our roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, broadband more recently. And that bill does that. So this is $550 billion of new money to create a whole lot of good-paying jobs doing what should have been done decades ago. It's not just roads and bridges. It's water systems all over this country are in really deep trouble. You got millions of people, when they turn on the water faucet, can't drink the water that comes out of the tap. So this is a major step forward in terms of good jobs and bringing our country up to the 21st century. So it's good. Now, and then on top of that, obviously, the House just last week passed the Build Back Better plan. And this doesn't deal primarily with physical infrastructure. It deals with the needs of our people and with climate. And now it comes to the Senate.
And you're hopeful that it's going to pass?
Well, it is going to be a very significant debate because we are in a situation where our Republican colleagues, who just a few years ago wanted to repeal the Affordable Care Act and throw 30 million or so people off the health care they had, who were able to pass Trump's tax bill, which gave massive tax breaks to the wealthy and large corporations, ran up the deficit by some $2 trillion, the national debt by some $2 trillion. We do not have one Republican vote to address the crises facing working families, not one. So it comes down to the 50 members of the Democratic caucus, plus the vice president. And it is no great secret that we have some pretty conservative members who want to weaken the legislation, and we have some progressive members who want to strengthen the bill that came from the House. My own view is that what the House passed was very strong. It was important, but we can make it better. It did not go as far as it should in taking on the pharmaceutical industry and lowering the outrageously high costs of prescription drugs in this country. It did not go far enough in demanding that at a time of massive income and wealth inequality that we have the wealthy stop paying their fair share of taxes in corporate America as well. I believe that in this day and age, in the richest country on earth, we should expand Medicare not only to cover hearing aids, which was in the House bill, but to cover dental care and vision as well. Plus a number of other provisions I think need to be strengthened. So there will be a very significant debate taking place in the Senate over these issues.
Senator, after the Republican Great Depression back in the late 1920s, early 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt came into office and spent an enormous chunk of our GDP, or a percentage of our GDP, on infrastructure. I'm sorry, I don't remember the numbers right now. It's been a few months since I was reading about this and actually writing about it. And then Eisenhower with the interstate highway system and all that sort of thing. So leading at least in the 3 decades leading up to the 1980s, up to the Reagan administration, we were averaging over 1% of GDP a year being spent by the federal government on maintaining our country's infrastructure. Reagan came in and introduced neoliberalism, what some people refer to as austerity or Reaganism, and that dropped within a couple of years in the early 1980s down to around 0.2%, from 1.2 to 1.3% before that. And we've been basically spending at the federal level about 0.2% on infrastructure for 40 years, which is why it's crumbling, obviously. But this was the primary tenet of neoliberalism, which was sweeping the world. Now you've got President Biden, you've got the United States Senate, you got the House in the hands of the Democrats saying, we're not going to go down that road anymore. Is this the beginning of the end of America's 40-year experiment with whatever you want to call this? I'm calling it neoliberalism, with this bizarre ideology that the only role of government is to run the army?
Well, I hope that is right, but I think it would take probably more time than we have to give you a thorough answer on that. Because, it really will depend upon what happens in the 2022 elections and obviously what happens in 2024. But what I can tell you is poll after poll makes it very clear. The American people are disgusted with the unbelievably obscene levels of income and wealth inequality that exists, where the top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 92%, where during the pandemic the billionaires made out extraordinarily well while thousands of workers died doing their essential jobs, trying to keep the economy going. So I think people are seeing all of that income and wealth inequality, and they're asking why it is that the very, very rich get much richer while so many people are struggling, why it is that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, why we have almost 600,000 people sleeping out on the street, why we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all as a human right, not to have paid family and medical leave. Why do we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs? Why are we not leading the world in combating climate change? So I think a lot of people are asking those questions. And my Republican colleagues don't have an answer to those issues because they don't even ask those questions. They're living in a very different world, which is trying to divide people up, often based on race or sexual orientation or the country in which we were born. And unless Democrats get their act together, in my view, and very quickly make the case to the working class of this country that if you're going to vote for Republicans, what you're going to do is end the effort we have made to eliminate or to cut back on childhood poverty, to create the millions of good-paying jobs that are desperately needed. We've got to make that case a lot stronger, I think, than we have. But, that's where we are.
Two of the things that polled really well coming out of the 2020 election and that Donald Trump exploited were the decriminalization of marijuana and I think far more importantly, so-called free trade, moving our jobs overseas. This is something that you and I have been talking about since, for 2 decades on this program. And you and Sherrod Brown have been real champions in trying to bring our jobs back home. And now I'm seeing, kind of Republicans get ahead of this. We've got a Republican in the House who has introduced a bill to decriminalize pot at the federal level. That's very popular. We've got Republican, it was Donald Trump who came out in 2016 and said the unmentionable for the last 40 years that our free trade policies were a disaster. Where are the Democrats on these issues?
Well, look, Tom, it is no great secret. I mean, my view is that the Democrats have not been, and you've heard me say this for a long time, as strong as they should be, to say the least, in standing up for the working class of this country. No question about that. Republicans are worse. And they are hypocrites. They talk about being the party of the working class. And in fact, time after time after time, all of their efforts go to protect the wealthy and the powerful. But in terms of the legalization of marijuana, I think most of us understand that the so-called war on drugs was a failed war. It was a disastrous war. And many, many millions of people suffered as a result of that. And it is my view, and has been my view for a number of years, that we should move to the complete legalization of marijuana and that we should expunge the records of those people who are arrested for possession. In terms of trade, what you got is, and what we're seeing right now, Tom, one of the things, before I get into trade, that has to be pointed out, is that in terms of Build Back Better, what the media, the corporate media, is not covering is the unprecedented degree to which the corporate elite, and by that I mean the drug companies who are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbyists, to make sure we continue paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, the private insurance companies who are working overtime to make sure we don't expand Medicare to cover dental, hearing, and vision. The fossil fuel industry, obviously, is much more interested in their profits than the future of the planet, spending a whole lot of money to stop us being as strong as we should be. And, of course, the very rich who don't want to pay their fair share of taxes for spending money. So what you have, and you know, this is, I know you know this, your listeners know this, but corporate media doesn't talk about it very much, is you have a Congress which is significantly dominated by campaign contributors from the wealthy and by, you know, the PACs that fund these contributions, and by the lobbying efforts of the wealthy and the powerful. And really what Build Back Better is about is trying to determine whether or not we are going to have a government that stands up for the middle class and the working class of this country, for the children, for the elderly, for our climate, or whether or not we're going to be dominated again by the greed of the big money interests.
And I believe there's Buy America provisions in there, aren't there?
Yes, there are. There are. And I think getting back to this issue of so-called free trade, it is just amazing to me, you know, that when the corporate elite decided years ago, decades ago, they said, well, why do we want to pay workers in America a good wage when we can hire people in China and other desperate countries for pennies an hour? That's what they wanted, and that's what they got, and that's obviously what we've got to reverse.
Yeah, there you go. Senator Bernie Sanders, chair of the Senate Budget Committee, sanders.senate.gov. Senator Sanders, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always great talking with you.
Good to be with you, Thom. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. And you too.